When someone you love goes silent, the first instinct inside of you is to take it personally. You tell yourself a story: they're rejecting me, they don't care, I'm not enough. But what if that silence wasn't rejection at all? What if that silence was the loudest proof of how much they feel, of how deeply they're consumed by emotions they don't know how to handle? The truth is, this silence can be obsession in disguise. An avoidant doesn't retreat because they feel nothing. They retreat because they feel too much. Their silence is their shield, their armor against vulnerability. They are not pushing you away because you are unworthy. They are pulling away because the weight of their desire terrifies them. Think about it. If there was no care, no longing, no hunger, would they need to withdraw? Would they need to build walls? No. Indifference does not hide itself. It simply moves on. But obsession hides. Deep love hides. And avoidance is often the mask that powerful emotion wears when it doesn't know how to be expressed. Your role in that moment is not to collapse into fear. It's not to chase, not to beg, not to demand. Your role is to stand firm in presence, to hold your ground with patience and certainty, because when you don't panic, when you don't interpret their silence as your rejection, you create a sacred space, and in that space, their fear begins to soften. Their silence starts to shift, and what felt like distance becomes an invitation for trust. Patience is power here. It is not weakness. It is not passivity. It is strength, the kind of strength that whispers, I see you, I feel you, I am not afraid of your silence. And when that message reaches their heart, their armor cracks. That obsession they've been hiding, that deep longing they've been burying, finally finds air to breathe. So the next time an avoidant goes quiet, don't write the story of rejection. Write the story of secret obsession. Their silence does not mean you are not loved. It means they are wrestling with how much they do love. And if you can hold steady, if you can stay anchored in your worth, you will discover that the silence is not an ending. It's a doorway to intimacy far deeper than words can ever express. Silence is one of the most misunderstood behaviors in relationships, especially when it comes from someone with avoidant tendencies. When a partner suddenly withdraws into quietness, it is natural for the human mind to spin stories of rejection. You may feel that their silence is proof that you are unworthy, unloved, or insignificant, but the deeper truth is far more complex. Silence for the avoidant is rarely about punishing the other person. It is about protecting themselves from the overwhelming flood of emotions they cannot yet regulate. It is not a weapon, it is a shield. They go silent not to hurt you, but to survive their own inner chaos. Think about the power of silence in the human journey. From the beginning of time, silence has been a space of reflection, of recalibration, of resetting. It is where people go to regain a sense of control when the external world feels too loud. For the avoidant, silence serves that exact purpose. Their nervous system becomes overwhelmed by intimacy, vulnerability, and closeness, the very thing they crave, the bond, the connection. The love also triggers a fear of being consumed or losing themselves, so they retreat into silence as a way of finding safety again. To misinterpret this as rejection is to misunderstand their inner landscape. If you look closely, silence often reveals the opposite of rejection. A person who is indifferent, who does not care, who feels nothing, will not bother with silence. They will simply walk away, detach fully, and move on with their life. Silence is not the language of indifference. It is the language of overwhelm. It means they care so deeply that their system cannot process it all at once. Silence is their way of saying, this is too much, too fast, too intense for me right now, and I need to protect myself. When you begin to see silence this way, you shift from feeling abandoned to recognizing the depth of what is actually happening beneath the surface. This is why patience becomes essential. When you can look at someone's silence and realize it's protection, not punishment, you stop making it about your own inadequacy. You stop reacting with fear, panic, or anger. You stop chasing or demanding answers because you understand their silence is not about you. It is about them. And when you no longer interpret it as rejection, you create safety. That safety is what allows them to eventually step out from behind their shield. The irony is that the more you push against silence, the thicker their armor becomes. The more you demand, the more they retreat. But when you stand steady, calm, and secure, their silence begins to soften. They start to realize that they can be safe in your presence, even when they feel vulnerable. Silence loses its grip when it is met with acceptance rather than resistance. There is wisdom in not rushing to fill the silence, in allowing the quiet to exist without labeling it as abandonment. In that stillness, transformation happens. They slowly learn that silence can coexist with love, that withdrawal does not mean disconnection forever, and that the bond can withstand the waves of fear that arise in moments of closeness. In fact, silence, when embraced with compassion, can become the very ground where trust begins to grow. So the next time an avoidant goes silent, pause and remember that what you are witnessing is not rejection. It is protection. It is their nervous system calling for space, their soul asking for breathing room, their heart wrestling with feelings that run far deeper than words. If you can hold that perspective, their silence will no longer trigger your fear. Instead, It will invite you into a deeper understanding of love, a love that is patient, steady, and strong enough to withstand the quiet storms of another's heart. When someone with avoidant tendencies creates distance, the first reaction we often have is to assume they are disconnecting, losing interest, or turning away from the relationship. It feels like a withdrawal of love, a slow rejection that leaves you standing in uncertainty. But the paradox is this distance is often desire in disguise. The avoidant does not step back because they do not care. They step back because the intensity of what they feel inside overwhelms them. The very act of creating space is not proof of indifference, but rather a sign of how much power their emotions hold over them. Imagine standing in front of something you desperately want, something that stirs up every fiber of longing in your soul. For many, that would be a moment of leaning closer, of reaching out, of grabbing hold. But for someone wired with avoidance, that intensity feels dangerous. It feels like losing control. The closeness they crave threatens their sense of independence, their self-protection, and their identity. And so, instead of stepping forward, they step back. They retreat not because they do not want the connection, but because they want it so much that it scares them. Their distance is a way of trying to manage the magnitude of their desire. This is one of the most misunderstood dynamics in love. When an avoidant pulls away, many partners translate it as rejection, thinking, if they loved me, they would move toward me. If they cared, they would stay. Yet the truth is that indifference does not pull away. Indifference does not dance with closeness and distance. Indifference simply lets go. The fact that the avoidant oscillates between connection and withdrawal is proof that something much stronger is alive within them. They are drawn, even obsessed, but that desire feels unsafe to reveal. So instead of showing it directly, they regulate it through distance. When you begin to see distance this way, your entire perspective shifts. Instead of chasing, instead of panicking, instead of trying to close the gap immediately, you start to understand that their step back is part of their process of moving forward. They are not leaving. They are regrouping. They are not rejecting you. They are wrestling with their own emotions. And in that wrestling, their desire for you grows deeper, even if it is temporarily hidden under the surface. What matters most in these moments is how you respond. If you take their distance as proof of unworthiness, you create a cycle of fear and pursuit. You chase, they retreat further, and the relationship becomes a tug of war of unmet needs. But if you stand steady, if you respect their space without collapsing into insecurity, you create a different outcome. You send the message that you are not threatened by their withdrawal, that your love is strong enough to withstand temporary distance. And in that stability, their hidden desire finds permission to emerge. Think about it like breathing. No one can inhale forever. At some point, there must be an exhale. Intimacy with an avoidant is like that rhythm of breath. They inhale closeness deeply, but then they need to exhale space to regulate their system. The exhale is not the absence of desire, but the balancing of it. And just as every exhale makes way for another inhale, every moment of distance makes way for deeper connection when the time is right. When you learn to hold steady through their retreat, you stop fearing distance. You begin to see it for what it truly is, a reflection of desire so intense that it requires pauses, a hunger so consuming that it demands regulation. The distance does not mean they do not love. It means they love in a way that frightens them. And by meeting that fear with patience and confidence, you allow the hidden desire beneath the distance to finally be revealed in its fullest, most powerful form. Beneath the quiet surface of an avoidant heart lies a storm of emotion they rarely let the world see. What many interpret as coldness or indifference is often the opposite. It is obsession carefully hidden beneath layers of fear. The avoidant personality has learned through life experiences that vulnerability is dangerous, that expressing deep desire can lead to pain, abandonment, or loss of self. So instead of showing the intensity of their feelings, they suppress them, bury them, disguise them behind silence, distraction, or distance. Yet just because something is hidden does not mean it does not exist. In fact, the very effort it takes to hide their emotions reveals how powerful those emotions truly are. Obsession is a word often misunderstood, but in this context, it simply means a deep preoccupation, a constant awareness, an unshakable pull towards someone they cannot stop thinking about. For the avoidant, this pull is both exhilarating and terrifying. On one hand, it lights up their soul, makes them feel alive, and awakens a longing they cannot deny. On the other hand, it threatens the walls they have built to keep themselves safe. They are drawn like a magnet, but every step closer feels like risking exposure. So the obsession remains a secret, hidden beneath behaviors that appear detached, logical, or even indifferent. This is why avoidants can seem so contradictory. They may send signals of deep interest, moments of closeness, passion, or tenderness, only to pull back suddenly as if nothing ever happened. To the outside observer, it feels confusing and inconsistent, but to the avoidant, it is simply survival. Their fear tells them, if I show how much I care, I'll lose myself. If I reveal how strong this obsession is, I'll be hurt, rejected, or abandoned. So they silence their heart not because the feelings are absent, but because the feelings are too strong to manage. The paradox is that their fear and their obsession are inseparably linked. The more they feel, the more they fear. The more they crave closeness, the more they believe they must protect themselves from it. That is why their love often looks like a dance of approach and retreat, of intensity followed by withdrawal. The obsession does not vanish during withdrawal. It intensifies in the background. They think, they imagine, they replay moments, they long in silence. But instead of reaching out, they hold back, trapped between the pull of desire and the grip of fear. Understanding this hidden reality changes everything. Instead of interpreting avoidance as lack of love, you begin to see the depth of what is actually happening beneath the surface. Their distance is not emptiness, it is containment. Their silence is not absence, it is self-protection. Their cool exterior is not indifference. It is a mask for emotions burning so intensely that they cannot risk showing them. When you realize this, you stop doubting your worth every time they retreat. You stop chasing validation, and instead you anchor yourself in the knowledge that what is hidden is often far greater than what is revealed. This is where compassion becomes powerful. If you can look beyond the surface behavior and recognize the fear that drives it, you create safety. And safety is what allows an avoidant to slowly lower their guard. When they sense that their obsession will not be ridiculed, punished, or used against them, they begin to let pieces of it show. At first, it may be subtle, a small gesture, a lingering gaze, an unexpected message. But with time and patience, the hidden obsession transforms into visible devotion. Every hidden feeling longs for expression. Every concealed desire seeks the light, and no matter how deep an avoidant buries their obsession, it does not disappear. It waits silently until the conditions feel safe enough to emerge. To recognize this truth is to understand the mystery of their heart. Their fear is real, but so is their obsession. One conceals the other, but both exist side by side, shaping the unique way they love. When someone with avoidant tendencies withdraws into silence, it can stir up an avalanche of insecurity inside of you. The instinct is to fill the gap, to chase them, to demand answers, or to question your own worth. Yet this is the very moment where your role becomes most powerful. How you respond to their silence, to their distance, to their retreat, determines whether their armor grows thicker or whether it slowly begins to soften. Your role is not to collapse into panic, but to create an atmosphere of safety where trust can take root. An avoidant does not withdraw because they want to punish you. They withdraw because their nervous system is overwhelmed. Intimacy feels like pressure. Closeness stirs up fear of being consumed or losing independence. At the very moment you interpret as rejection, they are wrestling with inner turmoil. This is where your presence, not your panic, becomes the medicine. If you can meet their silence with calm, if you can stay anchored instead of reactive, you shift the dynamic entirely. You communicate without words. I am not afraid of your silence. I am secure enough to hold space for you. That is when their walls begin to lower, because safety, not pursuit, is what draws an avoidant closer. Think of it like standing in front of a frightened animal. If you lunge, it runs. If you chase, it hides. But if you stay still, grounded, and patient, it begins to trust your presence. The avoidant nervous system is similar. The more you rush to close the gap, the more suffocating it feels. But when you respect the space and remain steady, you become the anchor in the storm they do not know how to calm. Your role is not to convince them with words, but to embody the security they secretly long for. This doesn't mean ignoring them or pretending not to care. It means shifting from reaction to response, from fear to confidence. Instead of bombarding them with questions like, "Why are you quiet? Did I do something wrong? Do you still love me?" You choose to hold your ground. You trust in your own worth. You remind yourself that their silence is not a verdict on your value. You stop seeing yourself as powerless, and you step into the strength of knowing that your stability is what will eventually invite them back. When you create this kind of space, something profound happens inside of them. They begin to sense that being close to you doesn't mean losing themselves. They realize that their silence doesn't drive you away, that their retreat doesn't destroy the connection. Over time, this breaks the cycle of fear. They start to come forward not because they were forced, but because they feel safe enough to do so. That's the paradox. When you stop chasing, they stop running. When you stop trying to fill the silence, they eventually choose to break it on their own. Your role is also to tend to your own inner world during these moments. Silence can trigger your wounds, your fears of abandonment, your doubts. But if you can breathe through those emotions and choose presence over panic, you transform not only the relationship, but also yourself. You prove to yourself that you are capable of standing strong in uncertainty, that you don't need constant reassurance to know your worth, and that inner power becomes magnetic. So much of love is not about fixing the other person, but about becoming the presence that allows them to unfold at their own pace. With an avoidant, your role is not to drag them out of hiding, but to build a space so safe, so steady, so grounded that their hiding no longer feels necessary. In that sacred space, trust grows. And with trust, The silence that once felt like rejection becomes the very soil where intimacy begins to bloom. Patience is one of the most underrated forces in relationships, yet it carries the power to unlock the deepest parts of an avoidant's heart. When faced with silence or distance, the natural reaction is to push for answers, to close the gap, to demand clarity. But with an avoidant, impatience only deepens their retreat. It reinforces their fear that closeness means pressure, that intimacy comes with strings attached, that love is conditional on constant availability. Patience, on the other hand, sends the opposite signal. It communicates safety. It tells them without words that love is not a trap, that they are free to move at their own pace, and that their heart can open when it is ready, not when it is forced. Patience is not passive. It is not about waiting helplessly, nor is it about tolerating neglect or abandoning your own needs. Patience is active strength. It is the ability to remain steady in your truth, to hold your ground without collapsing, and to trust that connection does not need to be forced in order to be real. For the avoidant, this quality is transformative. They are so used to relationships being a tug of war, one person chasing, the other retreating, that when they encounter patience, it disrupts the entire cycle. Suddenly, there is no battle to fight, no pressure to resist. What remains is space, and in that space, their heart slowly begins to feel safe enough to reveal itself. Think about how trust grows in nature. A flower does not bloom because you pull at its petals. It blooms because the environment is right, the soil is fertile, the sun is warm, the water is steady. In the same way, an avoidant heart does not open because you demand it to. It opens when it feels the consistent presence of patience, when it knows that love will not vanish in the face of silence, and when it senses that closeness is not conditional on constant performance. Patience is the fertile soil where their trust takes root. In practice, this means allowing silence without panic. It means understanding that their distance does not automatically mean disinterest. It means holding on to your sense of worth even when they are not offering constant validation. This is not easy. It requires a deep reprogramming of your own instincts, especially if you carry wounds of abandonment yourself. But every time you choose patience over fear, you build strength in yourself and safety for them. You show them that love can be steady, that you do not need to control or rush the process. Over time, this patience transforms their inner world. At first, they may still retreat, still go quiet, still create space. But with every experience of your calm presence, their nervous system begins to relax. They start to believe that closeness does not have to mean loss. They begin to trust that intimacy does not have to be suffocating. And slowly, almost without realizing it, they allow more of themselves to be seen. Their guard lowers, their voice softens, their desire, once hidden beneath fear, begins to surface. The most beautiful thing about patience is that it not only changes the avoidant, it changes you. It teaches you to hold your ground, to rise above insecurity, to embody love without attachment to immediate results. You discover that real strength is not in forcing, but in allowing. Real love is not about rushing, but about enduring. And in that endurance, you unlock the part of their heart they have kept hidden for so long. Patience is power. It is the silent message that says, I am not leaving when things get quiet. I am not collapsing when you step back. I am here, steady, whole, and unafraid of your silence. When they finally feel that, when they see that your presence is consistent, their heart opens, not out of pressure, but out of trust. That is the moment when the silence breaks, when intimacy deepens, and when love finally steps into its fullest, most authentic expression. Silence has a language of its own, and in the heart of an avoidant, it often speaks louder than any words could. We are conditioned to believe that communication always has to be verbal, that if someone loves us, they should say it openly, frequently, and with certainty. But love does not always appear in neat packages of words. Sometimes it hides in the pauses, in the absence, in the quiet stretches where nothing is spoken yet everything is felt. When an avoidant goes silent, it is easy to assume the worst, to imagine that the bond is breaking or the love is fading. But in truth, silence is often their way of saying, I feel more than I can express right now. Words can be manipulated, rehearsed, or forced, but silence rarely lies. Silence reveals the inner conflict between desire and fear. It shows that something powerful is stirring within them, so powerful it cannot yet be put into language. If they were indifferent, there would be no struggle, no hesitation, no pulling away. Indifference moves on easily. Silence, however, carries weight. It carries the imprint of emotions wrestling to find expression, of longing hidden behind fear, of love that does not yet know how to reveal itself. To see silence only as rejection is to miss its deeper truth. It is often the loudest evidence of a heart overwhelmed by feeling. Every moment of silence becomes a test, not for them alone, but for you as well. How you interpret it, how you respond to it, determines whether silence becomes a wall or a bridge. If you fill the quiet with stories of abandonment, you create distance where none was intended. If you panic and rush to demand words, you turn silence into pressure. But if you can hold the silence with grace, if you can breathe into it and trust that it carries meaning beyond what is visible, then silence becomes connection in disguise. It becomes a space where both hearts can grow stronger, where trust can deepen, and where unspoken truths slowly gather the courage to emerge. There is power in understanding that silence itself is a form of communication. When an avoidant pulls away, their quietness is not emptiness. It is filled with thought, with longing, with hesitation, with desire that feels too intense to name. It is their way of processing, of protecting, of trying to regulate what feels uncontrollable inside them. If you meet that silence with presence instead of fear, you give them a gift, the chance to exist without pressure, to feel without being forced, to return when they are ready rather than when they are pushed. This does not mean ignoring your own needs. It does not mean tolerating neglect or silencing your own voice. It means cultivating the wisdom to distinguish between absence and processing, between rejection and protection. It means recognizing that in some moments, silence is not a void to be feared, but a sacred pause that allows deeper intimacy to take root. Over time, when you treat silence as a language rather than a rejection, you begin to hear what is truly being said. You notice the way their eyes linger even when their words do not. You feel the undercurrent of their energy even when their mouth is closed. You recognize the depth of their presence even when their voice is absent. And slowly, the silence stops being something that frightens you. It becomes something you respect, even something you learn to cherish, because in that silence is where transformation begins. In that silence is where their obsession wrestles with fear, where their heart struggles against its own walls, where their love gathers the strength to finally break through. Silence, when met with wisdom and patience, is not the end of connection. It is the proving ground of love. It is the place where words fall short, but truth is still alive, waiting for the right moment to be spoken. And when that moment comes, when silence finally gives way to expression, the love that emerges is deeper, stronger, and more authentic than anything words alone could ever build. At the heart of it all, love is not about constant words, constant reassurance, or constant closeness. Real love lives in the spaces between, in the silences that test our faith, in the distance that asks us to trust, and in the patience that invites hearts to unfold in their own time. When an avoidant goes silent, it is easy to tell yourself a story of rejection, but the truth is far more powerful. Their silence is not proof of your inadequacy. It is proof of their struggle with how deeply they feel. It is not distance born from lack of love, but distance born from too much love to handle at once. And when you respond with calm, with strength, with patience, and with compassion, you turn their silence into sacred ground. You create a space where fear dissolves and trust is born, where obsession hidden beneath walls finally finds the courage to step into the light. So let silence no longer frighten you. Let it teach you strength, let it deepen your faith in your own worth, and let it remind you that love is bigger than fear, louder than distance, and stronger than silence. Because when you hold steady in the quiet, you give the greatest gift of all. You become the presence that allows another soul to rise into the fullness of love they've been hiding all along. Thank you for giving your heart, your attention, and your spirit to this message. Thank you for choosing to rise above fear, for daring to see silence not as rejection, but as a doorway to deeper intimacy. May you walk away today with more strength, more wisdom, and more compassion, not only for those you love, but for yourself. And may your journey remind you always silence is not the end of love. Sometimes it is where love truly begins.